Plato famously begins his dialogue The Republic with a huge party. It's going on in the Piraeus, or the downtown, and Socrates announces to the reader that he began by going down to the Piraeus. Specifically, what he wanted to do was to say a prayer to the goddess, by which we usually think he means Athena, but also to see how the celebration was going since they were holding it for the first time. And what was the celebration? Athens was most likely celebrating the discovery of a new goddess, a Thracian goddess named Bendis. That's right. The Republic begins on a note that forces us to remember that Athens was a polytheistic society. And so, when you happen upon a culture that worships a god that is not yours, you take yourself to have discovered something. It's like discovering another star or another planet. We thought there were 8 planets. Oh, now there's 9. We thought that there were only these many constellations. Oh, there's another. We thought there were only 16 gods, but then we met these people. Now there are 19. The addition of a foreign culture's god or gods to their pantheon was seen as some cause for celebration. Monotheistic religions tend not to react this way to religious diversity. Monotheisms are very competitive. It's like, look, there's one god and it's this. So if you're worshipping something that's not this, I got news for you. It's not a god. Oof. And so often throughout history, including in the inception of Christianity, monotheisms have been charged with being intolerant of religious diversity. That's what we're going to talk about today. Hey everyone, Dr. Bauer's office hours here. Let's continue with some study guide questions to make sure that we can proceed with clarity. What is the puzzle of religious diversity for monotheism? What is Greer's argument for polytheism? How does Greer justify his argument's premise about monotheism? What are 2 varieties of exclusive monotheism, and what might be wrong with each? What is inclusive monotheism, and what might be wrong with it? Today's reading is a chapter called The Logic of Polytheism by John Michael Greer in his book A World Full of Gods. The argument from this chapter is a very old argument that goes back to the ancient Greeks and Romans about why polytheism has at least one advantage over monotheism. That advantage has to do with how each of the types of theism, mono and poly, relate to the phenomenon of religious diversity. Religions are diverse. People like to worship a variety of gods, goddesses, and godlings. And when they embark on some kind of spiritual journey, whether it's through meditation, prayer, or some other means, they often find themselves in some divine presence, which is distinct in character from the divine presence reported by other people that go on similar journeys. Religious diversity brings with it a diversity of experiences. And the diversity of experiences brings with it a diversity of experienced divinities. Greer's thesis for this chapter is that religious experience supports polytheism. If you're considering monotheism and polytheism side by side and only considering those, then you should side with polytheism, at least if your concern is religious diversity. Indeed, we could say that religious diversity poses a kind of problem for monotheism. The problem is this. How can there be only one God, given that there are experiences of many? Not only do different people experience individually different gods and goddesses, so that one person having a profound religious experience may encounter a figure who is different from the figure encountered by someone else. Say in one case, they might have the head of a beast and the body of a bird, and in the other case, they might be humanoid. But also, different people in the throes of religious experience might encounter many divinities. And not only are there many different experiences which seem to be of distinct divinities, In addition, there are also many distinct religious texts, all of which claim to be inspired by various divinities. The Iliad purports to chronicle a story of divine beings interacting with mortal armies, just as the Old Testament purports to tell a story of Yahweh interacting with the Israelites in a similar manner. And not just the texts of Athens and Jerusalem, but those the world over. Experiences and texts. And we can add prophets to that list as well. Considerations of culture broadly seem to speak of different gods, goddesses, and godlings. And that's the puzzle for anyone who maintains that there's only one. The puzzle of religious diversity for monotheism is, how can there be only one God, given all the experience which points to many? Using this puzzle as leverage, Greer presents an argument. At first is presented by analogy, but we'll present its literal version right here. First, monotheism's only available responses to religious diversity rely on special pleading, or an unfounded exception to argumentative standards. Second, polytheism does not have to rely on such special pleading in response to religious diversity. Third, if, in response to religious diversity, monotheism must rely on special pleading and polytheism must not, then, other considerations aside, polytheism is correct. So, other considerations aside, polytheism is correct. The idea is that polytheism handles religious diversity much better. If you encounter another culture, and they have 15 gods you've never heard of, it's easier to accept the legitimacy of those gods if you already think there are a bunch of gods out there. It's harder to accept the legitimacy of those gods if you think there's only one god. The premise in Greer's argument, which is doing all the heavy lifting, is this idea that monotheism relies on some kind of special pleading or some unfounded favoritism when it has to react to the phenomenon of religious diversity. He explains himself using a fun little story involving cats, and I think we'll just go with that, and then I'll give a literal explanation afterwards. Here's the story. A folklore researcher comes to a village one day, knocks at the door of the first house, and asks the householder about his belief in feline entities. "Of course I believe in cat," comes the answer. "There is one cat who is tabby with blue eyes. I was taught about cat by my parents. Every morning I go onto the porch and call, 'Here, kitty, kitty, kitty,' and leave a bowl of kibble. By evening the kibble is gone. The householder also reports a personal experience of cat. I once went one morning with kibble and cat was there, gazing up at me with those big blue eyes. I couldn't say a word. I managed to set the bowl down without dropping it, and cat came right over and started eating. It was a magical moment. Householder number 1 knows that his neighbors have different opinions about the nature of cat, but believes that they are mistaken, that the cats they describe simply do not exist. It's rather sad, really," he says. "They don't know any better, and go on making the wrong kind of calls and leaving out the wrong sorts of food for cats that aren't there. He insists that the food that they leave out is eaten by wandering hobos." The researcher goes on to the second house and asks the same questions. Householder number 2 also believes that there is only one cat, but says that it is a black short hair with green eyes. Every morning he puts a bowl of milk out on the back steps and calls puss puss puss, and the milk is gone the next morning. He also has a personal encounter with cat, and describes the hair-raising terms the night that he came back drunk from a pub in the next village to hear an unearthly yowling and see cat staring down at him with glowing eyes from the top of his picket fence. "I tell you, it turned my life around. Since that day, I've never touched anything stronger than water." Householder 2 also has something to say about his misguided neighbors who disagree with him about the nature of cat. He knows that they also leave food out, but believes that these offerings are taken, not by cat, but by something less pleasant. "Sewer rats come out at night and eat what they leave," he says. "Oh, I'm sure some of them believe that they are actually feeding cat, but I'm convinced that there are others who are knowingly feeding the rats, even petting their slimy fur. Disgusting, I say. Sooner or later, in its own good time, cat will kill the rats, and we'll see who in this village gets purred at and who gets scratched and bitten." Our researcher proceeds to the third house and asks the same questions. The householder here also believes in cat, but has far more tolerant views than her neighbors. "He's a big marmalade Tom with orange eyes," she explained. "I know the others disagree with that, of course. One must recognize that they've actually got some real knowledge of cat, after all. They all understand that cat has 4 paws, a tail, pointed ears, and whiskers. They may have seen cat from a distance or in bad light conditions. Cat may even have rolled in the dust and then appeared to some of them. He works in mysterious ways." Householder number 3 has also had a personal encounter with cat. She saw him one evening prowling atop the fence that divides her property from that of the second house in the village. That's how I know he isn't limited to any one person's property, she explains. At noon every day, she leaves out a bowl of canned food and withdraws in silence, knowing that this is the proper way to feed Cat. She holds, however, that Cat possibly also eats the kibble and the milk left out by the other two householders, even though she believes the likes of canned food best of all. The researcher proceeds to the fourth house and asks the same questions. Householder number 4 is an engineer with shelves full of scientific books, and he's quick to pour scorn on what he considers to be a nonsensical belief in cat. I've never seen a cat, and I don't believe anyone else has either, he says. Their claims to have encountered cat personally? Hallucinations or misperceptions of entirely non-feline phenomena, strongly assisted by an intense will to believe. If you want to see a cat badly enough, you'll end up convincing yourself that every moving leaf is a cat. The disappearance of the food left out? Eaten by traveling hobos, most likely. There are many explanations that don't require belief in any sort of cat. He points to the blatant contradictions in the different accounts of cat. One cat can't be a tabby, a black short hair, and a marmalade Tom all at the same time. It's logically impossible. And that's as good a proof as any that there's no such thing as cat. Finally, our researcher goes to the last house in the village, a little cottage at the end of the lane, and asks the same questions to the old woman who opens the door. She laughs. Have you been talking to the others? They're all daft. She informs the researcher there have been 3 different cats in the village for years. A tabby, a black short hair, and a big marmalade Tom. Each cat has its own territory and makes its own rounds, and each one knows where and when to get the food it prefers. Of course, they all come here now and again, and I've got kibble, milk, and canned food to feed all of them. What makes it all the more funny, the old woman goes on, is that a new cat, a Burmese female, showed up in the neighborhood a little while back, and now she's had a litter of kittens. What the people up the lane will make of these when they start going out by themselves, I can't begin to think. So, with this lovable little example involving cats, the first 3 houses in this story are what we will call monotheist. They believe in exactly one cat. The first monotheist claims that there is one cat, and all the other cats which other people claim to have experienced don't exist at all. The second homeowner is a monotheist. They only believe in one cat, but they are a value-exclusive monotheist. They think that the cats which are experienced by other people, they are things that exist, but they're not good, like cats are. The third house is an inclusive monotheist. They believe in one cat with many faces. There's one cat, and many people view it from various lights and from different angles, and as a result they have different accounts of it. All the other houses who report different cats are just viewing the one cat from different perspectives. The fourth house is an atheist, someone who doesn't believe in cats, and anyone who thinks they saw a cat is some dum-dum who accepts stupid things. We'll call them a new atheist, and not, say, a material atheist who thinks that the belief in cat is the result of struggles and desperation in your ordinary life. And the last house owner, of course, is a polytheist, someone who believes in many cats. Now, of course, this story has a certain bias to it. After all, as a matter of fact, many cats do exist. So if we are considering the existence of gods on analogy with the existence of cats, we are being told a story that is pro-polytheist from the outset, but not in a way that is crucial to the argument, fortunately. Let's talk about the various positions, and let's now discuss a less metaphorical version of the argument. Here we go. Let's consider. Thalia and her people worship Zeus. Mel and her people worship Cthulhu. Each of them has a certain kind of problem accounting for the beliefs of the other. Suppose Mel is a monotheist. She thinks the only god that exists is Cthulhu. How is she supposed to interpret Thalia's worship of Zeus? One way is to be an existence-exclusive monotheist. An existence-exclusive monotheist says that the things which other people worship as gods don't exist. Or to put it more succinctly, the gods of other religions don't exist. That's what existence-exclusive monotheism says. So in this case, Mel would claim Cthulhu exists, but Zeus does not exist. At this point, Thalia should ask, why? How come your God is the one that exists, and my God is the one that doesn't? Here's where we get to the idea that special pleading is involved. Mel might claim, I have a special sacred text, the Necronomicon, which proves that Cthulhu is real. But it's not like there's only one faith out there that has sacred texts. I mean, most of them do, right? In response, Thalia could say, I have the Iliad and the Odyssey, and they attest to the divinity of Zeus. So, one for one, they both have sacred texts. What about prayers, revelations, and religious experiences? Maybe they differ there. Mel claims that she has performed rites to Cthulhu and experienced powerful magic. But then Thalia says that she has performed theurgy to Zeus and experienced miracles as well. Mel claims that her tradition of worshipping Cthulhu is heralded by a series of prophets and magical beings. Thalia claims that her religion has prophets and magically endowed people as well. Do you see what's happening here? A religion claims that their God is the only God, but then when asked to show why, the only evidence that they can procure is evidence which is evenly matched by other religions whose God is alleged not to be real. So the Christian minister produces a Bible and says, I have a sacred text, and that text shows that Yahweh is the only God. As if the culture that they're preaching to does not itself have sacred religious texts that talk about their own gods. And likewise with religious experiences. Someone may have a religious experience of a god, but that does not show that that is the only one, and that the other gods experienced by other people's religious experiences are not real. So what entitles someone to say that their God alone exists? According to Greer, nothing. It's special pleading. Let's move on to the next variety of monotheism. Suppose that instead of saying that Cthulhu exists and Zeus does not, Mel had a different approach. She said, well, Cthulhu is a god. Zeus might exist, but Zeus is something else. A devil, a demon, a lesser being, which in many respects is godlike, but is not a god. This is what we'll call value-exclusive monotheism. It doesn't deny the existence of other cultures' gods, but it denies their value. It denies that they are good. It denies that they are gods on the grounds that they have the alignment with cosmic value that one would have to have in order to be divine. The iconoclastic Christians of the late Roman Empire, who went around destroying temples and beating up worshippers of the traditional Olympian gods, were this type of monotheist. Oh, those other gods are real, and they're evil. That is value-exclusive monotheism. In the same way that Thalia would be entitled to ask, how come your God exists and mine doesn't? So, in this case, Thalia is entitled to ask, how come your God gets to be a non-devil, but all my gods are devils? What special status does Cthulhu have that makes him divine, but makes Zeus and all the other gods of all the other religions into devils, demons, or lesser beings? Again, we've got the same pattern of evidence. A sacred text. Well, they all have sacred texts. A religious experience. Well, all the religions have a religious experience. A prophet. Well, they all have prophets. Miracles. They all have miracles. Again, what we have is special pleading. Or so goes Greer's argument. Now, suppose Mel was a little bit more tolerant, and she wasn't so exclusive about her monotheism. Maybe she reaches out to Thalia with an open hand and a smile and says, hey, there are many paths to worshipping Cthulhu. One god with many faces. There are many ways in which Cthulhu appears to different cultures. Your culture has experienced Cthulhu in a way where you call it Zeus. But it's Cthulhu. Join me. What's wrong with that approach? In case it's not already obvious, there's some special pleading involved. How come the one god behind the many faces is Cthulhu and not Zeus? Is it because of the sacred texts that invoke Cthulhu? Is it because of the prayers and miracles pertaining to Cthulhu? Is it because of the prophets? Is it because of this and that and all the other things that all the other religions have? Again, special pleading. Just in the same way that the existence-exclusive monotheist relied on some special pleading for a set of evidence in order to say why their God existed and the others did not, and how the value-exclusive monotheist relied on some special pleading for their set of evidence in order to show why their God is good and the other objects of worship are devils, so in this case is there special pleading to show why, behind all of the various masks, the one true God is this culture's and not another's. Besides, the one God, many faces is only something that works when you're considering another culture that is also monotheistic. What if Thalia worship not only Zeus but also Athena? Zeus and Athena are not only each different from Cthulhu, they're different from each other. Is Thalia supposed to believe that she is so foolish she cannot tell the same divine being apart from itself as it switches between masks steering her very worship of it? Again, it involves a kind of talking down to the other cultures, saying that somehow they are primitive in their worship of a plurality where there is really some unity that only they know. Now, many monotheistic people like to consider themselves very tolerant of religious diversity, specifically because they think there's one God with many faces, and they may be taken aback by Greer's argument. Why can't there just be one God with many faces? What's so wrong with that idea? And here I'd like to consider an argument by analogy. Let's say that every few hours a car drives by my front window. It actually does happen that way. Is it possible that behind the diversity of cars, first a sedan, then a sports car, then a truck, is it possible that behind that automotive diversity, there is some kind of unity of driver? Is that possible? Absolutely. Absolutely, it's possible. But why think that? It's possible for there to be just one driver who's zooming past my road in many different cars, but why think that given the appearance of diversity? Given that the cars are different and the driving styles are different, why should we assume that there is a single same driver just because there could be? The fact that there could be is not reason to think there is. The fact that there could be one divinity behind all religions, likewise, by itself, doesn't mean there is. Inclusive monotheism, like its more overtly intolerant exclusive cousins, relies on special pleading. Or do you disagree? Do you think that somehow polytheism is just as intolerant as monotheism, and that Greer has the whole thing wrong? Do you think that ultimately monotheism and polytheism both have a problem with religious diversity, or not? As always, I will leave it up to you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for filling out the study guide. See you next time. See you soon. Goodbye.